Hi and welcome to this video in our series of dealing with modulation. So just so we're sure what we mean by modulation, this is when a piece of music's in one key and we want to move to another key. Well, why would we want to bother? Lots of people are very happy making up a piece of music in C major and just staying in C major for the rest of their lives. But actually it begins to be a bit tedious after a while, particularly the longer the piece you're either writing or improvising. So to be able to modulate, move to another key is a really useful thing to be able to do. So what I'm going to talk about in this video is how to deal with this, a modulation by a semitone shift, because when composers first got into dealing with modulation in the 1600s and the 1700s, they tended to modulate to nearby keys. And that carried on being the case certainly during the classical period, and it was in the 19th century where people began to be more adventurous. So back in those earlier days, you'd think, well, I'm in C major, so maybe I could modulate to G major because that just involves adding a sharp, or maybe I could modulate to F major because that just involves adding a flat from C major. Or maybe I could go to the relative minor key of A minor. In other words, they would modulate to keys that were quite close by. So what happens if you want to do something more radical than a closely related key, but you want to go to a key that's really quite a long way away? And if you want to be really sure about keys, you may be happy with that. But if you're not, have a look at our video on the circle of fifths that explains how the whole key system works. And then you can see where the closely related keys are and where the keys are that are further away. So something that happens in a lot of songs is that you have the first verse and maybe the first chorus in one key, and then maybe it's going to shift up a semitone just to give the whole song a bit of a lift. It would happen in a lot of pop music. It might happen in worship songs in church, lots of different contexts where you might want to do this. And when some writers decide to go up a semitone, they do it without kind of transitioning. In other words, you finish in one key and suddenly you launch into another key, a semitone higher. And it's a bit like driving a car and changing gear without using the clutch. You can kind of do it, but it doesn't do your gearbox much good. And there's certainly quite a jolt. Now, there's a way of smoothing over this by a little trick that I'm going to show you. So say we're in the key of C major, and maybe we're getting to the end of a section or the end of a verse or a chorus or something, and we want to shift up a semitone. Now, when you think about it, a semitone up from C major takes us to D flat major. Now, D flat major's got 5 flats, so it's a long way away from C major. So how do I do that? Because when I modulate from one key to a neighbouring key, I try to find something called a pivot chord. In other words, if I'm going from C major to G major, I can say that chord 1 in C major is also chord 4 in G major. So that's a pivot chord. 2 isn't a pivot chord because it's got F natural in it. 3's a pivot chord, 4's not because it's got F natural in it. 5's a good pivot chord because 5 in C is 1 in G. 6 in C is 2 in the key of G. 7's not a pivot chord. So you see there are some chords in common with both the keys. So you pass through a pivot chord and then you carry on in the new key. And it's a way of using that kind of musical clutch to go from one key to another smoothly. But if you want to go from a key like C major with no sharps, no flats, to a key like D flat major with 5 flats, it's quite tricky to find a pivot chord, isn't it? But you can do this, find a pivot note. And in this case, we're going to use the note C. And what we do is we're tiddling along in C major quite happily, minding our own business in C. We're quite happily in C. Now we want to go up a semitone. So what do? We take the tonic chord in C major, we use the C as a sort of pivot note, and then under that C we put the dominant 7th of the key that's a semitone above. So let's think about that. A semitone above C major is D flat major. So I'm talking about finishing on chord 1, or the tonic chord in C major, and then using the dominant 7th in D flat major, which does have a C in it. So I do this. So you see what's happened? That takes me to the tonic chord of D flat major. So from there, it's very easy to do this. So you can see that this is the tonic chord in D flat major. So you see how we've done this? We've finished in C. We've used a dominant 7th in D flat, and then we've gone on in D flat major. And can you see how I've just managed to go into that key, which is 5 flats away, and it just goes very smoothly because we've used this dominant 7th in the new key. The reason it works is that the C is a pivot note that connects the keys. So you can do that from any key to any key, just simply by saying, if you're going up a semitone, if that's what you want to do, finish on the tonic chord of the key you're in, find the dominant 7th of the key that's a semitone higher, put that in, then put the tonic chord of the new key, and off you go in the new key. So it's a nice little trick to know, a modulation using a semitone shift.